Hello, I'm Henry Bonsu and this is Doubling Down, where every week we tackle a topic that's got you talking on social media and beyond. Joining me today are Sally Tomlinson, Emeritus Professor of Education at Goldsmiths London University, also Honorary Fellow at Oxford University. Also, the author and blogger Richard Phillips is here, as is the former Conservative parliamentary candidate Loanna Morrison. Thank you very much indeed for coming in. Really good to see you. Now, from immigration to sovereignty, from free trade to culture, analysts have offered many reasons why 17 million people, British people, voted Brexit. While some called it an expression of popular will against a remote political elite, others claimed it was a reassertion of national identity from a people tired of multiculturalism, mass migration. But the slogans that rang out during the 2016 referendum campaign reveal a deeper motive that has its roots in Britain's past. The calls to take back control and global Britain echo the days when Britannia controlled a third of the globe with an empire that Winston Churchill thought might last 1,000 years. Well, empire's long gone, but the critics say that the mentality it fostered is still with us. It's an attitude that tells British people they gave the world civilization. They alone won 2 world wars, and that they were better off before they joined the EU. The would-be British Prime Minister Boris Johnson may have urged Conservatives to be self-confident in their glorious past. But as we approach the end of 2018, Brexit has become a byword for chaos. Negotiations with the EU have all but ground to a halt. There are huge splits in both the main political parties, and with the looming possibility of no deal or a people's vote, what kind of Britain will emerge from this mess? So panel, we've had so much analysis on Brexit. I'm going to start with you, Professor Sally, as you've co-written a book with Professor Danny Dorling called Rule Britannia, Empire to Brexit, coming out January next year. Yeah. And it suggests that the shadow of empire hung over this whole Brexit process. Why did you come to that conclusion?
Right, well, we think Brexit is a disaster, but it may have a silver lining. And the silver lining is that just maybe the great British public will realise that there's no way that we're going to go back to an empire, that the notion of Great Britain and glorious Britain has gone. Whatever the empire gave to the world, it took more away from it. Empire was a time when countries were looted, people were enslaved, their labour was forced, food was taken from them. Empire may have been glorious to the British people, but it certainly was not glorious to the people that suffered under it.
But why would Brexit help to exorcise this demon or lance this boil? Okay. If Brexit was the result of people's love of empire or nostalgia?
Well, in 2016, 40% of people told a YouGov poll that they thought the empire was a good thing, you know, and 28% were a bit, you know, they didn't quite know. What happened was that our education system, which started elementary education around about 1870, it was kind of the high point of empire. Young men in public schools were being trained to go out and run the empire, militaristic-minded, full of racial arrogance and so on. This all kind of filtered down into schools, and you know, it hardly ever went away. I mean, some people watching may remember, if they were in England, that in schools there were pink maps with pink bits all over them, and they belonged to us, you know, the British Empire. And the textbooks, the juvenile literature. You remember the Tarzan films?
I do remember.
Tarzan
Johnny Weissmuller.
That's right.
I remember that.
Very good. Yes, he was always around, you know, to save white maidens, and the whole sort of notion of imperialism was still very strong, I think. And then you add to it decolonisation and the way people came, invited to come and do the work. They were not welcome. Immigration, xenophobia, racism has always been there.
So you think that Brexit has kind of exposed that, but you think it may help to vanquish it? I'm going to go to Loanna, because I suspect you may have a different view. You are a Conservative, a true blue Tory, but also you're a Brexiteer. You voted for Brexit.
Yes.
And was it because of your love of empire?
That didn't even occur to me. And I don't think it occurred to anybody else, to tell the truth. I mean, I don't want to really go back too far in my career, but when I was campaigning to become a member of Parliament, on the doorstep were builders telling me, listen, love, if you can get rid of those poles so we can have our jobs back, I'll vote for you.
As in get rid of the Polish people. The
Yeah,
Polish,
they didn't say, if you bring back the empire,
Yeah.
we'll vote for you. It wasn't something that even touched on their consciousness.
But wasn't there a link between their xenophobia, their concern about these Poles, and their innate sense of superiority? We're better than them. They shouldn't be here.
No. They weren't concerned about the Poles because of their race. They were concerned about the Poles because they were losing jobs on the building site. You know, low-skilled jobs were no longer available. There were Polish builders and plumbers coming who could undercut their income by a lot of money. And so therefore, it was a threat to their economic livelihood, not a threat to their memories of empire.
Right. Okay. Richard, what do you think? You're sitting there in the middle. I'm just wondering if that's where you are as far as this argument is concerned. What do you think really fueled Brexit?
I'm with Sally to the point that I'm an unrepentant Remoaner. And just to explain to anybody who doesn't understand what a Remoaner is, that's the word we use for Remainers who refuse to accept the result of the referendum. Right. And I am one because I think it's completely ludicrous, absolutely self-harming. I think leaving the EU is pointless, there will be a point. The point will be poorer than we were, whichever way they come out of it.
All right, but what do you think fueled the vote? What was the cultural reason?
I would say I've invented an acronym for this, which will be needed to explain. It's IDOTBAR, and IDOTBAR stands for "It didn't ought to be allowed," and which is, if people don't understand, is a kind of joke expression used to describe when people just don't want it. And basically what we've had is an unholy alliance between Daily Mail and Daily Telegraph readers and Sun readers
of the two largest right-wing newspapers.
Yes, and Sun readers, appealing to two slightly different groups. The Sun, sort of the lower end of the socio-economic scale, and the Mail and Telegraph, arguably to the slightly higher end of the socio-economic scale, owned by absentee landlords, as it were, tax dodgers in every case, or absent owners in America, in the case of Rupert Murdoch owning the Sun, the Barclay brothers owning the Telegraph, Lord Harmsworth owning the Daily Mail, laughably a non-dom, despite the fact he lives in England.
But for people, but for our viewers who don't know these individuals,
yes, but I mean the point I'm making is we've a foreign-owned press who, for some reason, which I don't quite understand, have been wholly against the EU since the
time. All right, you don't understand it, but maybe our next speaker will, because he's someone who spends his every waking moment thinking about Brexit. He is Stephen Wolfe, a former leading light in the UK Independence Party, and he's now an independent MEP for North West England. Thank you for joining us, Steve. What was Brexit really about for you?
For me, primarily, it was about having the ability to be an independent nation, just like so many other 100 countries across the globe, whether the large nations like the United States or China, or the growing important countries such as India or Brazil, and also and being away from an organization that for me was the European Union, that was making laws in Strasbourg, where I've just been today, that weren't set out in a manifesto by any political party in the United Kingdom, be that of the Labour Party, the Conservative Party, or the Liberal Democrats, but could be imposed upon that country. And when I was campaigning on the streets across the United Kingdom with ethnic minority groups, whether it's the huge Salvation vote that came across in Luton and Bradford, over 60%, and if you remember Robert Peston saying when he went to Luton and he met almost every Asian person he was meeting on the streets there was saying they were going to vote leave, he thought that was some sort of joke that was being put upon him. And it's because those people also understood the implications on their own finances if they can't change the laws in this country.
But hang on, Steve, wasn't that because they thought, as British Asians, that if there were fewer people who had a right to come in from the EU, more of their relatives, more of their family and others would be able to come in? And of course, during the Brexit discussions, it doesn't look as though that promise will be fulfilled.
Well, I think that certainly you're right. That was one of the many reasons that were given. But just like people who are from the white community that voted for Brexit, the Chinese communities that voted for Brexit, there are also personal economic reasons for them. Just as your speaker previously said about those people saying, I've lost jobs and wages and salaries to people who have come from a different country into the European Union.
All right, let me put this by you, Steve. So what do you understand then by this slogan, this term that I heard a lot, putting the great back into Britain? Isn't that harking back to the empire, back to the past?
No, I think it was actually trying to create something that was more positive for the future. I believe that we've actually become weakened as a country in terms of our confidence in ourselves because our civil service are less able to do the job anymore because they've outsourced the skills to the European Union. I think our politicians have become weaker in the way of their talent and their ability to do the jobs because they've outsourced it to the European Union. And I think one of the key things about this is that if you're talking about, okay, let's go back to the Commonwealth and our empire, it was those people who had confidence to go out and expand and grow. So for me, this was about a change in also our nation's attitude to ourselves, our country, our people, and our businesses. And I think it was about bringing confidence back. And great is a great word for showing confidence in yourselves, not about harking to the past, because certainly for me, I was born in Moss Side. I grew up in Manchester. In Manchester. You know, this is not about empire for me. This is about whether me, my family and friends could go out and expand in the globe.
But isn't there a concern that some of the leading Brexiteers, people like Aaron Banks, for example, like Douglas Carswell, former Tory MP, former UKIP president, a lot of these guys, if you look into their background, they were born during the old empire in Kenya and Tanganyika, etc., and they have a very, very odd attitude toward Africa, toward the developing world, toward the Commonwealth as a place that they just want to milk. Isn't this emphasis on Commonwealth as trading partner too little, too late?
I think actually it's quite the opposite, Henry, because only recently we had one of the leading candidates in Nigeria's presidential election said that he hoped that Brexit would occur because the European Union has been putting the squeeze on Nigeria and African nations for some time in terms of trade, and he hopes that we'll have a better trading relationship with us. When Theresa May went to Kenya, you got exactly the same sort of attitude there. And of course, when I was talking about immigration with the Malawians, they were turning around and saying, why is it that we can train our own nurses and doctors, but as soon as we do, we're finding hospitals in Manchester taking more of them, offering them better wages. So what is the point? And I think there was an economic kind of issue to this as well for African countries, where we have had a chance of taking away their nurses, their doctors, and trying to feed an NHS without training them ourselves, for example.
It'll be very interesting to see whether that changes once we leave the European Union. And Steve, final question. How has the attitude of your European colleagues changed towards you since the referendum vote?
Well, I think on myself, you've actually seen an opening because I've been engaged. I was engaged with Mr. Barnier in January of this year. In fact, I saw him again this morning where we discussed the Irish border and the offer of Canada plus that Tusk came out. There has been certainly an openness from other members of the European Parliament to get involved and make sure that we get a good deal. But only over the past few weeks, and I would say that was shown this week in particular on Monday, there are harder voices now in Verhofstadt, in Weber, and even Lambert for the Greens, who's been a really open person, that are becoming incredibly antagonistic to Britain. And I think that is because the tensions now of the negotiations, which are going all the time, are coming to a conclusion.
Stephen Woolf, MEP, thank you very much indeed for joining us. And interestingly, the former German ambassador to Britain, Peter Ammon, claimed earlier this year that Brexiteers are fixated on the Second World War, saying if you focus only on how Britain stood alone in the war, how it stood against dominating Germany, well, it is a nice story, but does not solve any of the problems of today. It'd be interesting to get him and Stephen Woolf into a room together. But panel, I'm just wondering, isn't that part of the problem, really? Think about cultural expression. A lot of it is rooted in the war, in this country. So, for example, if you go to football, I don't know if you do, but here's a slogan: if it wasn't for the English, you'd be Krauts, this term. Rule Britannia, stand up if you won the war, 2 world wars and 1 World Cup. Isn't it hanging over people's psychology in this country, even if they don't really know it? Loana.
Well, why shouldn't people be happy or celebrate what they think might have been good about their history? Every time you introduce one of us, you say, I was such and such. He was such and such.
Yeah.
She was such and such. So if you feel good about certain things that your country has done, I don't see why it shouldn't be celebrated. And to tell the truth, I'm quite happy that there was an empire to some extent, because
You're happy that there was an empire?
yeah, because
Okay.
it wasn't only negative. Lots of
Depends on who you
positive-
talk to, I suppose.
Exactly, it depends on who you talk to. But then that applies to everything in life, doesn't it? Everything has two sides. So we had people in the empire we had situations in the empire that was given by Britain, such as the justice system, democracy, things left behind which are still working very well for those countries.
Sally is smiling. Why are you smiling, Sally?
I'm smiling because we didn't actually have full democracy in terms of one person, one vote in this country until 1928, when women were finally all allowed to vote. The Indian MP, Shashi Thakur, has written quite eloquently in a book called Inglorious Empire, taking apart the
the notion that empire
of
was
the
a
rule
really
of
benign
law.
thing.
It was empire that gave countries the rule of law. Why, without the empire, they might have developed a rule of law perfectly well themselves. Democracy was, and still is, quite flawed. But, it can be still put forward as an argument that these countries, were better off under Britain.
Yeah.
Who can tell? It's like, Leanna says, we can't go back in history, we don't know. But I can say that there are 53 Commonwealth countries. 31 of these countries have under 3.3 million people.
Yes.
And 14 of them, of course, are tax havens, where some of those people...
So where's all this trade going to come from?
Yeah,
essentially,
where's
what
the
you're
trade
saying?
going to come
Richard
from?
wants to say something
and
very
these
quickly.
people that you mentioned, Aaron Banks and so on, even David Cameron's father had money in these
Yes.
Tax havens.
Yes.
Is this money going to stay there? Is it going to come back here and help build
Well, this is the big
Britain
question.
again?
Richard, briefly.
Yeah.
Well, several things. First of all, I don't take the view that everything in the past is bad.
Yeah.
What did the Romans ever do for us?
What did
Sorry,
the
but
EU
the
ever
point
do
I'm
for
making
us?
here
We
is
never
a
know
general
that.
principle. Not everything is bad, but at the same point, the idea of empire as a legitimate goal is no longer. It still exists. We've got the Chinese creating an empire in Africa, as we all know. It's just not called an
economic
empire.
partnership, they call it.
Well, it's they're basically becoming, and the American empire hasn't been an empire in those terms, but it's been an economic empire.
Okay.
And so the idea of one country seeking to dominate another has gone on since time immemorial, and I'm sure will go on.
But we're now enlightened, Richard. I'm going to come back to you very shortly. We're now enlightened because we want to get back to kind of the nuts and bolts of Brexit. And if Britain really has been shackled by a bureaucratic superstate for the last 45 or so years, it hasn't done too badly, has it? Europe's second largest economy, the world's sixth largest economy, one of the 5 permanent members of the UN Security Council, home of the global language, English. No wonder Prime Minister Theresa May was upbeat during her leader's speech to the Tory party.
You are the people we are all here to serve, and together we will build a brighter future for the whole United Kingdom. I passionately believe that our best days lie ahead of us and that our future is full of promise. Don't let anyone tell you we don't have what it takes. We have everything we need to succeed.
All the panel was smiling there. And Loana, didn't you wish you were in the room there listening to Theresa May extol the virtues of great global Britain? Where is Britain in the world at the moment? What is Britain's status post-empire?
Well, I'm surprised at what she says, because it never quite matches what she does. Mm-hmm. She says that we are, our best times lie ahead of us.
Yes.
We have what it takes. But if she continues with a policy that is very unpopular in the country,
the negotiation called checkers.
A negotiation called checkers, we won't be getting where we want to go. And if we're basically stuck in the middle right now, and it's her negotiating process which has brought us to this position, right? So if we stay in this position, it's a huge impasse.
But the big question is where Britain lies in the world at the moment. We'll come to you, Richard, and to you, Sally, in just a moment or two. But look, it's a programme where we're interactive. It's time for some social media. And here's what you've been saying on Twitter. We're going to start off with AJ, who says, Brexit, overriding all the arguments, is a personal desire to watch this country finally go down the toilet. Only then might we wake up from our post-empire superiority complex, shake off the memory of World War II and join the 21st century world as an equal partner. Crutchko says, Ramonas are trying to water down Brexit, reduce it to beige like their politics. After World War II, Japan had lost its empire, had been defeated militarily and had 2 A-bombs dropped on it. 20 years later, they were an economic powerhouse. The UK will be fine, Italy will follow. James says, the roots of Brexit lie in empire delusion, arrogant imperialism and xenophobia against anything foreign. And here's what you've been saying on Facebook. We'll start with Paul, who says, we seem to have a terribly inflated sense of self-importance. We deserved a special deal with Europe. We deserve to triumph on the football field. It's been like that for decades. Brexit didn't happen overnight. Melvin says, 53% of white voters wanted out and 73% of black voters wanted to stay in the EU. Black voters overwhelmingly supported staying in, not because of any love for the union, but because they recognised that the driving force behind the desire to leave was racism. And Olansky says, Brexiteers have long romanticised the days of empire when Britannia ruled the waves and was defined by its racial and cultural superiority. The referendum has not been about Europe, but about Britain and its imperial legacy. Now remember, you can always get involved in the conversation on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram by using the handle DoublingDownTV. So panel, what do you make of what you've heard, Richard?
Well, I think it's slightly wrong to frame it like this, Henry. Yes.
Well, this is what people are saying.
No, but I know we're framing it as a story about empire.
Yep.
I do agree that it's about people looking back.
Yep.
And that is part of the story, but it's not all of the story.
Well, the professor has found so much material supporting this theory, she's written a book
Yes, I know,
about
but
it.
I think the problem is she writes from a doctrinaire point of view, and I think that's fair enough. She's a socialist, that's fair enough. And eschewing
Sally?
No, hang on, Henry.
Okay.
Let me just finish. What I was trying to say earlier on is that what we have here is an unholy alliance. Old people
Yes.
were a huge factor in this, you
Yes.
know, and the fact that they get out and vote. And my contemporaries, who I told, you know, and I convinced nobody,
Yes.
my brother voted for Brexit.
Right.
Last night, I was with a friend of mine watching the football, we
Yes.
lost, who voted for Brexit and works at the age of 71
Right.
for a big motor distributor. He has just discovered the effect of the pre-Brexit situation
Yep.
on the motor industry, which is 20% down.
Yes.
Sales are down. And he has turned around to me yesterday and saying now he sees what it is,
So-
he wouldn't have voted for
Right,
it.
okay.
And I think people are beginning to understand the economic implications. But finally,
Right.
sorry, it's also a vote against the cultural changes that have taken place. Personally,
Yes.
I always thought that for this generation, for my generation, many of them, gay marriage was totemic.
Right, and that's why. Before we, I want to end with you,
Not that I'm
Sally.
against it, I'm making the
Loanna, your
point.
thoughts, your response to that?
I kind of agree.
Yes.
In a sense, but I agree with you that it's
Well, on the point of older people who didn't quite know what they were voting for,
well,
which
yeah,
is what Richard
that
seemed to be
argument I
saying.
don't agree
Right.
with, because if anyone cared to remember, way back from Margaret Thatcher, we've been having discussions about whether we should get any closer to the EU or
Yes.
not. All the prime ministers since then have promised that they would give us a vote on a referendum on
Yes.
the EU and didn't. Blair was supposed to give one.
Yes.
Brown was supposed to give one. Cameron was only bounced into it because of UKIP.
Yes.
Right? So it's people knew what they were
Can I
voting
ask you
for.
this? How many people do you think
Richard,
knew what a customs union was before
Richard,
this?
we're about to close the programme.
Sorry.
Loanna, thank you very much. Sally.
Okay, I actually voted 1975.
In the previous referendum.
Yes, in the previous referendum. I'm that old. And yes, so it was interesting because we were voting for a European Economic Community.
Yes.
And that's fine, but on the other hand, I was perfectly happy for it to go on. We learned at school what the Romans did for us. We never learned what the EDU did for us.
Yes.
But gradually it became apparent, if people had studied this, that it did a whole lot for it. And like your brother, we're now beginning to realise that it is not going to be glorious in the future.
Because wasn't Britain once called the sick man of Europe?
Well, yeah, I'm not sure it will be, but I don't think we're quite in Dancing Queen-like mode yet. Oh, that was when, yes,
Yes.
you can explain that later on,
Theresa
the
May,
Dancing
yes.
Queen bit. Yes, I don't think it is like Theresa May says it will be. It will be tough. I don't think the negotiations are finished yet. I think there are a whole lot of reasons why this happened. You know, we're sort of going back to Brexit has its roots in the British Empire, but roots then grow. There are trees. There's all these other reasons. A major reason, of course, is we are now the second most unequal economic country in this world after
And that's
America.
maybe why.
You know, I
All
mean,
right.
the inequality has a lot to do with this.
That's
Britain
a subject
is
for a future
resilient
programme.
country. We're a resilient country.
All right, a resilient
And we will
country,
bounce back.
and we'll bounce back. There speaks Margaret Thatcher in the version of Luana Morrison. Thank you very much indeed. And that's it for this week. Thanks very much to my studio guests, Professor Sally Tomlinson, Richard Phillips, and Luana Morrison. For news of next week's topic and to get your views in early, do check out Doubling Down on Facebook and Twitter. Till then, thanks very much for watching and goodbye.